Hello, everyone. My name is Seong-hee. I'm a general manager in SH, which means Seoul Housing, an agency for public rental housing. There are about 200,000 public rental housing units in Seoul area. My job is about housing welfare depart for tenants group in public rental housing. Well, I'm so happy to deliver my presentation. In my presentation, there are three stories related with households with housing crisis under pandemic and supportive housing for disabled people. Yes. This is my story's contents. There are four contents. Firstly, housing crisis and the pandemic. And number two, emergency temporary housing. Number three, counseling for vulnerable households. Lastly, I'm going to talk about supportive housing. This is a housing crisis and the pandemic. As you know, and as you feel, we are all under pandemic. In this situation, the resident condition of vulnerable people can be downgraded because jobs like travel agencies and restaurant jobs and simple jobs for low-income people are disappearing. Upper part in my presentation shows the path from home to homeless. And according to the survey by the organization for Organization for Homeless in Seoul, the number of homeless people is slightly increasing in the first half this year. So we have a big concerning about the increasing of homeless people because we had a similar experience in which there were many homeless people after economic recession following IMF, International Monetary Fund, in 1998. So that's why we, SH, as a public housing provider and an agency for public rental housing in Seoul City, designed two practical plans in response to housing crisis during COVID-19 pandemic. The quick responses are emergency temporary housing ETH and the counseling for the households in housing crisis. We hope that ETH will prevent vulnerable households from becoming homeless. And secondly, the counseling program will support households in crisis in their maintaining housing. I'm going to talk about emergency temporary housing in detail. This is the outline of emergency temporary housing. ETH, emergency temporary housing, is composed of two factors. First one is social housing, and second one is care services. The social housing is supplied for low-income households in the verge of homeless, and families having children have a top priority for entering ETH. And the rent for social housing, rent for the ETH will be free of charge for the coming households, and the duration of residence in ETH is 1 year in maximum. The care services, such as the urgent fund, basic living appliances, social services, and information for new housing, will be offered till the households moving to new stable social housing, and sometimes private housing within a year. And next page, this is housing images for ETH. ETH will be chosen among the social housing units. As you can see, the center part is the social housing examples called public rental, purchased rental housing, and one of them can be used for ETH. So one unit of ETH has 2 rooms and 1 hall and 1 toilet. And for a family having children, ETH units needs more than 2 rooms for children. Okay, and this is collaboration of players for ETH. For that, there are 3 players for ETH. Firstly, housing providers will provide some social housing to local government at a cost. And secondly, local government will supply the social housing as ETH to vulnerable households selected by the criteria, and the rent can be for free of charge. And the last player is the housing advice center. The housing advice centers give care services to vulnerable households for the moving to new housing, hopefully within about 6 months. This is planned for ETH in Seoul. There are 25 boroughs, which is a kind of local government in Seoul metropolitan city. Each borough will have 5 or 10 ETHs, and starts and opens ETH in 2021. And yes, this year SH made some MOU with the boroughs in Seoul. This is counseling for vulnerable households. This is the counseling program for households in the housing crisis because of COVID-19 economic recession, consultants in HWC Housing Welfare Center in Seoul, they are counseling the vulnerable households in arrears over 3 months. In the counseling, households with the housing crisis are receiving consultants' help, such as social services, job finding, financing aid, mental health program, and information of affordable housing. The purpose of this program is to support households in housing crisis because of jobless and unemployment in the pandemic. Yes, for counseling, boroughs, the local governments, and HWC, Housing Welfare Center, cooperate. In Seoul City, there are 25 housing welfare center, which is kind of a housing information and consulting center in each boroughs in Seoul. For the counseling, local governments find vulnerable households by checking the rent arrears and the maintenance fee arrears, water and electricity fee arrears. Now we have a little complicated system for counseling the households in crisis because of the protection law for the personal information. However, each HWC is doing their best to counsel the risky households by the cooperation of local government, and in the future, for that, we are going to make institutional improvement for this program. Yeah, the last one is supportive housing. What is supportive housing? Okay, supportive housing is made of housing plus supporting for independent living for vulnerable people, such as homeless people, elderly, the disabled people. For example, when homeless people and the disabled people move into the supportive housing, they can take some supporting services, such as you can see the diagram. Firstly, the community relationship and the healthcare and the connecting social services in communities and advocacy and supporting daily life and maintaining residence and consultation and case management. Seoul Metropolitan City is implementing the institutionalization step by step, and some experts are saying that on the pandemic, the independent living in supportive housing is better for containing spreading the virus. Okay. There are 3 supportive housing players. Firstly, housing providers, supply the supportive housing to tenants, such as a homeless person and elderly and disabled person, by direct contract for the housing at a cost. Secondly, the organizations for care services support the tenants with care services. The care services types are said earlier. And lastly, the Seoul metropolitan government controls the whole of the projects of supportive housing and gives the organization subsidies for operation, such as labor cost. And this is a plan for supportive housing. Okay, there are 450 supportive housing units in Seoul as of November in 2020. And SH is going to provide 200 supportive housing units in Seoul every year till 2022 at least. There are some living pictures in supportive housing in my presentation. As you can see, tenants are cooking and growing some vegetables on the rooftop together with the help of carers. And okay. Yes, I think it is last page in my presentation. Yes, these are residential satisfaction factors in supportive housing. SH surveyed the performance of supportive housing in 2019. In the survey, most of the tenants in supportive housing are happy with dwelling stability, self-confidence, self-decision, having jobs, mental and body health, and lastly, independent living in communities. Okay, I think this paper is the end of my presentation. If you have any question, do not hesitate. Please contact me by my email on last page. I will be happy to share about this presentation. Okay, thank you all for your warm attention.